All right, welcome back, everyone. Let's jump right in today. We are doing a deep dive, and today it's going to be a pretty intense one, I think.
Yeah, definitely. High stakes for sure.
We're talking Justice Department, presidential power, and, well, what happens when those two things collide?
Yeah, it's a recipe for some pretty big questions about, the balance of power in our government.
Absolutely. And the event that really kind of set this whole thing off was the firing of more than a dozen lawyers from the Justice Department. And we're not just talking about any lawyers here, right? Like these
Yeah.
were prosecutors who were working directly on criminal cases against former President Trump.
Yeah, and to be even more specific, they were part of Jack Smith's team. Now,
Mm.
maybe not everyone's familiar with what a special counsel is, but basically they're appointed, well, to investigate really sensitive or complex matters, kind of to ensure there's a certain degree of independence, from the usual Justice Department chain of command.
Right, exactly. So Jack Smith, he was this special counsel, and he was tasked with overseeing these high-profile cases against Trump. There was one about the mishandling of classified documents, and the other one was about his alleged attempts to try to overturn the 2020 election.
Yeah, some serious accusations there.
Yeah, big stuff. And then suddenly, out of nowhere, these lawyers, gone, fired, effective immediately, like by acting Attorney General James McHenry.
Just like that.
Yeah, and the reason given, was that these lawyers were considered, untrustworthy, carry out the current president's agenda, basically because they were involved in prosecuting him before. And that's a claim that has kind of set off a lot of alarm bells for people in the legal world.
Yeah, I mean, it's understandable, right? Because if you think about that reasoning for a second, it sets a pretty unsettling precedent, doesn't it? Does this mean that any lawyer who's ever prosecuted someone can just be, dismissed because they might be biased against that person, even if there's no actual evidence?
Yeah, it makes you wonder, like, what kind of impact this could have on investigations down the road.
Hmm.
I mean, are prosecutors going to be more hesitant to go after powerful people,
Mm-hmm.
because they're worried about their own careers?
It's a question worth asking for sure. And I think it speaks to a much bigger issue too, right? The whole idea of political interference in the justice system.
Yeah. And the reactions, I mean, they were pretty immediate, weren't they? Like, people were not happy.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Joyce Vance, she's a big name in legal circles, a former U.S. attorney, and she didn't hold back at all. Called it unacceptable, anti-rule of law, and she even said it was anti-democracy.
Wow. So strong words there.
Yeah, definitely. And I think this is, part of a bigger pattern too. There's been this reshuffling of officials at the top of the Justice Department. And some people, like the chief of the public integrity section, have even resigned. They just don't want to be a part of what's going on right now. It's kind of a concerning picture,
Yeah.
of what's happening inside the Justice Department.
It definitely makes you wonder if it's becoming more politicized. I mean, it's supposed to be independent. And what does that mean for everyone else? Like, does it affect public trust in the justice system as a whole?
It has to, right? I mean, if people start to think the justice system isn't fair, that it's not impartial, then it really undermines the whole foundation of our democracy.
For sure. But, we can't talk about all of this without addressing the other side of the coin, right? I mean, former President Trump and his team, they've consistently accused the Justice Department of being totally politically motivated,
Yeah.
right? That it's waging some kind of war against him, that it's been weaponized against him, his people, and Republicans in general.
Right. And it's not, it's not just talk either. Trump actually campaigned on a promise to reform the Justice Department, to overhaul it. And Pam Bondi, she was his nominee to lead it. And she's basically echoed those sentiments. She has suggested that these prosecutions against Trump were nothing more than political persecution.
So how do you even reconcile those two perspectives?
Yeah.
I mean, on the one hand, you have these concerns about political interference, right? And then on the other hand, you have accusations of political persecution. It's tricky.
It's a tough one. But I think it's important to consider the counter arguments too. So, for example, Jack Smith, he's come out and defended his work, right?
Yeah.
And he called the whole claim that he was influenced by the Biden administration laughable.
Yeah, and something else to keep in mind, the cases against Trump, they were actually closed after he got reelected. And at the time, the prosecutor said it was because of regulations that prevent them from prosecuting a sitting president.
Right. That regulation exists to stop the Justice Department from being used as a political tool to undermine a sitting president. Now, whether that regulation is, a good idea or not, that's a whole other debate, right?
Uh-huh.
But the fact is, those cases were closed, which doesn't exactly support the idea that there's this ongoing vendetta against Trump.
That's true. And it's also important to remember that a lot of those lawyers who were fired, they weren't partisan appointees, right? I mean, they were career prosecutors with experience across different administrations, like both Democrat and Republican. They were chosen for their expertise, not their political beliefs.
Exactly. And that makes this whole situation even more confusing, right? Like, why fire experienced prosecutors who have a good track record?
Yeah, it's a good question. Okay, so we've got these firings, which are, well, they're unprecedented. And we have reactions from all sides and a lot of questions still. But here's where things get really interesting. All of this ties into a review that's happening right now in D.C., and this review, well, it could actually change how we think about the Capitol riot.
Yeah, that's right. Edward Martin, who's the top federal prosecutor in D.C., and it's interesting, he's actually a Trump appointee. He announced this internal review, and it's looking at the charging decisions made in the Capitol riot cases.
So what exactly are they reviewing?
Well, they're specifically looking at the decision to charge over 200 people who were involved in the Capitol attack with obstruction of an official proceeding. So basically, Congress's certification of the Electoral College vote.
Right, and that decision to charge them with obstruction, that was a big deal at the time, right?
Yeah.
It was seen as a way to hold people accountable, for trying to disrupt the transfer of power.
Exactly. But now with this review, well, we're kind of re-examining that whole decision. It raises questions about whether those charges were, legally sound, and were they appropriate given what happened.
And the implications of this review are, I mean, they could be huge, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. If they find that those obstruction charges weren't warranted, then it could lead to, charges being dropped or reduced for a lot of the defendants. And I mean, that would be a huge win for the people who say that the Justice Department went too far in prosecuting the Capitol riot.
But then on the flip side, if the review ends up supporting the original charging decisions, well, then it could really reinforce how serious the attack was.
Right.
Right. And show the government's commitment to holding people accountable.
Right. Either way, this review's findings are going to have a big impact. I mean, it's going to affect how we as a society see what happened on January 6th and what the consequences should be for those who were involved.
So let's take a step back here for a second and think about what we've talked about. We have these firings at the Justice Department, which are really controversial, and we have accusations of political interference and a review that could completely change how we understand the Capitol riot. It's a lot.
It is. It really is. And I think it shows how complicated all of this is,
Yeah.
There's no easy answers here, and the stakes are incredibly high.
Right. And that leads us to, I think, the most important question. What does this all mean for our listeners?
That's the big question, isn't it? Well, I think this whole situation really underscores how important it is to have an independent judiciary, one that's free from any political pressure. And it also shows that we need more transparency and accountability within the Justice Department.
Yeah. And maybe even more importantly, I think it makes us all think about what we believe about justice, and accountability, the rule of law in our democracy.
Yeah, absolutely. Because these aren't just, abstract legal ideas. These are the principles that our freedom is based on. They make sure that no one, not even a former president, is above the law.
All right, well, that's about all the time we have for today. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. Keep thinking about all of this, keep asking questions, and we'll see you next time.